Welcome back. China is banning exports of rare minerals used in defense products to the United States. The Chinese Commerce Ministry blocking the export of gallium, germanium, antimony, and other materials with potential military applications. It comes after the U.S. issued new restrictions on exports of certain semiconductor chips to China. There are some fears U.S.-China trade relations could also impact the healthcare sector. U.S. imports of Chinese pharmaceuticals has surged since the COVID pandemic. Imports grew by 485% in just 2 years, according to the Atlantic Council. Joining me now is Indiana Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, a member of the House Judiciary and Republican Study Committees. She's also the commissioner of the U.S. Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And I know that you are making health care one of your main focuses in the new Congress. So that's why we wanted to start with health care with you, Congresswoman, because I'm pretty outraged by the fact that we still have supply chains that we are relying on China to send us the underlying components of our prescription drugs. Did I hear right? I mean, is that the facts? We're still relying on Communist China, our #1 adversary, to send us the underlying components of our prescription drugs.
Well, you are very right, Marie. And unfortunately, we saw what happened during the COVID pandemic and how China manipulated our supply chain. And what we did nothing. President Biden, when we tried to pass some legislation to secure our supply chain as part of CHIPS Act, we passed it through the Senate, through the House, and then President Biden took it out, and Democrat did it for him. Unfortunately, we want to take it serious. And depending on one country where 80% of ingredients, even for simple antibiotics, are derived from China. Depending on one country, it's dangerous, but depending on communist country that actually is adversary and try to take our country down, this is really serious national security risk. And I'm looking forward for the Trump administration that will take it seriously, because they did.
I mean, they've already threatened us. I remember in 2020, and I mention this tweet all the time, it was one of the propaganda sites of China. I believe it was Xinhua News or one of the I don't know which one it was, but they're all state-run media. Obviously, they're all propaganda. They put out a tweet in the middle of COVID in 2020 and said, well, maybe since the U.S. is blaming China for COVID, maybe we won't send them the underlying ingredients for prescription drugs. And then that tweet was quickly taken down. I actually took a picture of it. I couldn't believe I was stunned by it. And sure enough, they took it down. So how come it's been almost 5 years since COVID? How come we haven't done anything about it yet?
Because we have a very failed administration that appeasing China, and we also have Congress that really haven't taken its issue seriously. It's all about the money. We do a lot of messages fighting, China at Fox News channels, but it's all about legislation. It's all about where the money goes and having a serious legislation. And as you know, this institution hasn't been governing for the American people for a while. But I think this election sent a message. And if my party doesn't stand up and help President Trump to actually deliver legislation, because you cannot have, through managing and governing through executive orders, because it's all temporarily. We have to have serious legislation to address our national security risks and dependencies in China, because this is going to be very difficult for our economy and for our people. And also China has so much leverage over us, and it's very dangerous for us.
And I know you have a couple of pieces of legislation pending in terms of defunding the CCP. Tell us about that. What has the most propensity to actually get broad support? One of the issues we talk about so much on this program is the fact that there are sanctioned Chinese companies that trade on our U.S. exchanges. We already know that these companies, these Chinese companies that trade on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, they don't follow the same accounting rules that every other public company follows. So what about I mean, is it fair to say scores of millions of Americans are unwittingly helping to fund the fentanyl crisis by investing in those companies?
Of course. It's even worse, Maria. We also have our pension plan that invests in CCPs through index and mutual funds that Americans don't even realize that we're actually financing CCP and their military operations through our pension plans and putting our country in danger. And when we try to delete these stocks, right now, Biden administration through PCAOB actually slow working the enforcement, that Congress passed several years ago. And we actually, as a CPA, used to do quality control inspections, I was very surprised that only Chinese operations were exempted from that.
Unbelievable. Michael Balboni, jump in here because there's been absolutely zero response from Joe Biden on this. You've got Secretary of State Anthony Blinken meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels yesterday, and we're going to get to the Ukraine story in a moment, but how many times has Blinken and Yellen and Biden gone to China to kiss the ring of Xi Jinping with no mention whatsoever of the COVID cover-up, of fentanyl, of all of this?
So what's so ironic about this move by China to try to limit the amount of chemicals we have for our pharmaceuticals in this country is they do nothing to stop the precursor chemicals for the development of fentanyl and meth in Mexico. That is a gray zone conflict.
Well, they work with the drug
this
cartels.
They work with the drug cartels. And so they're saying, we're not going to give you the chemicals you need, but we're going to continue to let these chemicals go in the supply chain, which then winds up poisoning young Americans. But Congresswoman, the big question is, what are you going to do now with the Trump White House to really work on stopping this fentanyl crisis coming across the border?
Well, I hope we're going to have a courage and grow the backbone and actually dealing with this issue. Because if you think about it, China doesn't have to enter our country, but through drug cartels, they kill over 100,000 Americans a year. Think about that. If we would have a war and over 100,000 Americans, would die, and what would do? And it's a lot of young Americans, and it's really, it's a serious, situation for our country. So I think we have to secure our country. I'm an immigrant. I'm a legal immigrant. We're a country of immigrants, but we are now creating a country of lawlessness, where drug control controlling our southern border, enslaving the people. I mean, let's talk about the slave labor in China or some of these countries in Africa that they're using a lot of slave labor to produce rare earth minerals. No one talks and raises concerns about it. Or they bring in miners here to work on some Chinese-owned plants, even in our country. So this is a serious issue, and Congress better start dealing with that. But we have to make sure it's all about the money and the funding and start authorizing this funding. We have so many blank checks and unauthorized funding that haven't done for decades.
Well, Joe Biden is in Africa. Didn't he just leave and promise them another $1 billion there? He's sending more money to Ukraine. Meanwhile, you've got people who are still struggling after Hurricane Helene and Milton in this country. Congressman, real quick on China, let me just end this with this. 78,000, now we're told, 78,000 Chinese nationals have come into America through the wide open border on Joe Biden's watch. What are they doing here? I mean, you know that they can't just pick up and say, I'm moving to America. I want to get out of here. No, you can't do that in China. This is a communist country. You need approval. So are those people directed to come here or what? What do you think it is?
Well, I think it's really, a plan of China to destabilize our country. They infiltrate our universities. They send people to steal our intellectual property. And now they steal people, go through illegally through the border. This is a very serious issue. And then they use cartels to kill Americans. This is a hybrid warfare that we see from a lot of countries like China or Russia. And we need to take it seriously. And Congress has to get their act together. So I'm looking forward to helping, next administration, because this administration failed the American people.
Do you think Trump will be able to help end the war in Ukraine?
Well, that war has to be end, but unfortunately, we deal with both failed president of Ukraine and our country, so it will need some, strengths and strategy that President Trump can bring to the table.
Okay, we'll be watching that. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. Thanks for your work, Victoria.